Bran had always been passionate about climbing the walls of Winterfell. Since he was a child, he treated every stone, crack, and ledge as if they were natural steps of a castle built to be conquered. He was fast, agile, and silent, which made it almost impossible for anyone to stop him before he was already on the rooftops. Even so, he was constantly being scolded by old Nan, Maester Luwin, and especially his mother, Catelyn Stark. She called him a fool and said that one day he would fall. It was after one of these warnings that Jon Snow, his voice low and his gaze concerned, but also with that hint of challenge for his half-brother to surpass himself, called him into the courtyard. He told him that if he ever slipped, not to panic, just hold on to whatever he could, with all his might, even if his fingers tore and bled. That stuck in Bran's mind, like advice between brothers that carried weight beyond words. As the days passed, the castle prepared for the arrival of the royal entourage. There was music, meat roasting in every corner, and banners flying. When the kings arrived, Bran was ecstatic at the grandeur of the knights and their golden armor. But the dazzle soon gave way to habit. The royal entourage arrived and everyone was introduced with great pomp and some laughter. It was only a few days before Bran was climbing again, seeking ever higher and more challenging hiding places. And so it was that, on a gray afternoon, he reached the top of one of the less frequented towers. And it was there that his eyes caught sight of a scene that took him a moment to comprehend. Jaime Lannister and Queen Cersei were together, naked and entwined, lost in desire. The shock made him let out an involuntary groan, and before he could escape, Jaime lunged forward. "What did you see?" the knight said urgently. They had a brief conversation while Cersei panicked and gathered her clothes from the floor. Jaime then pushed him away, but on impulse, Bran grabbed Jaime's shirt with all his strength, remembering Jon's advice. The two plummeted together from the tower. The impact was brutal. The sound of the fall echoed across the courtyard. Cersei screamed so loudly that her voice traveled through the grand stone tower and resonated until it could be heard by anyone below. She ran down, dressing hastily, desperate to know if Jaime was alive. Servants rushed in, guards arrived, and among the first was Theon Greyjoy, who was right below and was the first to hear the queen's scream and the sound of the two boys falling. Theon was no fool and quickly realized the absurdity of the scene. Jaime lying almost naked, Bran motionless beside him, the woman's scream coming from the tower, and the queen with her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, breathing heavily. Confusion was immediate. There was fear in everyone's eyes, but also something else, suspicion. When some climbed the tower, they found Jaime's clothes lying there, proof that he had been up to something improper. The discomfort grew like a disease, spreading among the residents of Winterfell. In the days that followed, Cersei remained tense, between pleas and false smiles. Theon, on the other hand, saw this as an opportunity. Certain that he understood the source of the scandal, he approached the queen with hungry eyes. While she stared at Jaime's pale, unconscious body, he whispered. He promised to keep the secret, to pretend he hadn't heard anything, in exchange for something he had long desired. If she spent a night with him, the Greyjoy would not tell everyone about the incest. Cersei, overcome with hatred, slapped him hard. Frustration and humiliation overwhelmed Theon, and he revealed everything to Ned Stark. He revealed that he had heard the scream from the top of the tower, and that he could tell the king what he knew. The news spread like wildfire. Robert Baratheon, already drunk, heard the rumors circulating in the halls of Winterfell. When confronted with the insinuations about Jaime and Cersei, he lost control. He shouted, stumbled over his own feet, and demanded his war hammer, the same one he had once used against Rhaegar Targaryen. He stumbled toward his wife, but was restrained by Ned Stark and two soldiers. The king roared, overcome by a mixture of rage and drunkenness. The sight of Jaime almost naked, the suspicion of incest, the public mockery. It all hurt his royal pride like a serrated blade. Robert ordered an immediate investigation, but his spirits were already high. He did not wait for concrete evidence. Finding himself cornered and humiliated, he ordered Cersei to be confined to her chambers under the direct surveillance of well-armed guards. He said that, until further notice, she was under suspicion of treason against the throne and the morals of the crown. Ned tried to calm things down and suggested caution, but he realized that, at least for now, the king would support a trial of the events. Tension spread among the guests, and the joy of the royal arrival had given way to a cold atmosphere of mistrust. Days passed, and Jaime finally awoke. He was in a bed in Winterfell, but there was not a single familiar face beside him. Only guards watched the door. The silence of the tower was broken only by military footsteps and suspicious whispers. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a dagger. Ned Stark was the first to question him. The Lord of Winterfell watched coldly, measuring every word. He interrogated Jaime firmly, suggesting that he knew more than he was saying, that the clothes found, Cersei's scream, the shock of the servants, and Theon's own look painted a grim picture. But he needed confirmation, something concrete. Jaime remained silent. He tried to maintain the Lannister pride, even lying down. But when he tried to get up, he said nothing. His legs were immobile. He tried again. Nothing. Despair rose in his eyes and spread through his body like a fever. Hurried footsteps brought the Maester of Winterfell, who performed some tests. It was he who delivered the verdict. The fall had broken part of his spine. Jaime Lannister was paraplegic. The news hit him like a curse. His eyes lost their light. Days of torment followed. Jaime, once the most skilled knight in the Seven Kingdoms, was now a broken man, literally and emotionally. He discovered, in devastating silence, that his member was also unresponsive. The pride, virility, and image he had built up over a lifetime collapsed in an instant. He called himself crippled, useless, a shadow. He refused food, refused conversation, refused anything that reminded him of the world before. He would spend hours in silence, staring at the ceiling, while anger built up inside him and he was not allowed to see Cersei. Even the news that Cersei was imprisoned did not move him. Even the whispers about Robert calling for executions did not touch him. Jaime was plunged into a personal darkness where even fear seemed to have no place. The guards at the door commented among themselves that he might not survive much longer. Ned, meanwhile, watched everything with growing anguish. He knew that if Bran did not wake up, the truth would never emerge. And Jaime's silence, even now stripped of pride, was an almost insurmountable barrier. There was a wound there that did not bleed, but it burned. Then, on a pale morning, when the wind cut through the battlements and the crows cawed loudly, the unexpected happened. Bran Stark opened his eyes, first slowly, as if returning from a deep dream. Then his movements came to life. The boy was back. Catelyn saw him first and ran to embrace him, then ran to call the others. Relief broke through the weight of weeks of uncertainty. The boy was fine and moving slightly. Ned, his eyes brimming with tears, silently thanked the old gods. When his family asked him what had happened, Bran spoke clearly. He said he had been climbing a tower when he heard voices and, curious, saw Jaime and Cersei together, naked, like a man and a woman, but he didn't know exactly what that meant at his age. That was when Jaime pushed him. But before he fell, he remembered what Jon Snow had told him. If he ever slipped, he should hold on with all his strength. And so he did. He grabbed Jaime himself, taking him with him. Bran's confession caused an uproar in Winterfell. No one could pretend it was just an accident anymore. Upon learning of the revelation, Jaime no longer saw any point in hiding the truth. Prostrate, broken inside, he confessed. He said he had pushed Bran. It didn't take long for them to realize that the Queen's children, Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella, were his, not Robert's. The silence that followed was terrifying. Robert heard the words like thunder in the middle of a quiet night. His fury was instantaneous. He ordered Jaime and Cersei to be executed. He shouted that he had been deceived for years, and that his heirs were nothing but golden lies with green eyes. The news reached Casterly Rock like a stab in the back. Tywin Lannister, upon learning of his children's arrest and the threat to his grandchildren's lives, considered the revelation a forged affront. He said it was all northern fabrications to tarnish the honor of House Lannister. He demanded that his children be released and his grandchildren returned. When this did not happen, he mobilized the armies of Casterly Rock and marched toward the Trident. Tensions spread like wildfire in a dry forest. Houses began to choose sides. War was inevitable and loomed on the horizon. Ned, as Hand of the King, begged Robert to be prudent. He said that war at that moment would ruin the kingdom, still fragile after the last rebellion. But Robert, blinded by anger and wounded pride, refused. He began to gather his own armies and reinforced defenses in the north and the Riverlands. Tywin responded by capturing Renly Baratheon during a trip to Allied lands, making him his hostage. This forced Robert to temporarily halt the executions. Ned, in turn, tried to negotiate, but the spears were already being sharpened and the drums of war were sounding in every direction. The first clashes took place in the Riverlands. The Mountain, Tywin's brutal servant, led skirmishes with unparalleled cruelty. Villages were burned, men were beheaded, and women were raped. But the Hound, Sandor Clegane, remained loyal to Robert. In a field covered in mud and blood, the two brothers of steel faced each other. The battle was intense, but Sandor won. The giant fell. As personal revenge, the Hound cut off the Mountain's head and threw it into the first bonfire he found that night. The war dragged on for years. Lords swore allegiance one day and betrayed it the next. Hostages came and went, taken from one castle to another like pawns in a game of power. Many smaller houses were wiped out or absorbed, but little by little the balance began to tip against the Lannisters. When Ned Stark gathered enough allies, he led a devastating assault on Casterly Rock himself. At his side was Roose Bolton, always grim but effective. It was he who, in the midst of the final battle, raised the spear with Tywin Lannister's head impaled on its tip, his face frozen in fury and surprise. With Tywin's death, Casterly Rock fell silent. Without its lord, the stone fortress became cold and hesitant. Many vassals of House Lannister chose to surrender. The war for them was lost. Ned, tired of bloodshed, began negotiations. Peace was necessary, though difficult to accept. Jaime, already condemned, was publicly executed. His gaze was empty, without regret or pride. Cersei, meanwhile, had disappeared. Theon Greyjoy had secretly freed her, and in return, he received what he coveted, her body. It was a shameful pact, but effective. Cersei vanished like a shadow. Bran remained sane and strong. He recovered without any lasting effects and grew up under his mother's watchful eye. Tyrion, on the other hand, was freed. Ned and Robert judged that he had no part in the betrayals of his sister and brother. He was the last legitimate heir to the House of Lannister. To preserve some stability, Myrcella and Tommen were taken to the north, raised as wards of Ned Stark. They were no longer princes, but they would have a dignified life. Joffrey, deposed and with a dark temperament, was sent to Casterly Rock. Tyrion, seeing the latent cruelty in his nephew, decided to exile him to the Wall, where he could cause no more harm. Robert, free from the burden of a fake marriage, married again. He chose a beautiful and vigorous young woman from a house close to the Baratheons. For a while, joy seemed to return. When he learned that she was expecting a child, the king toasted with wine, beer, and meat as if winter would never come. But Robert's heart was already so fat and clogged with fat from his excesses that during a celebration at Storm's End, he fell dead amid laughter and cries. The cup was still in his hand when his heart stopped beating. Still, the boy who was born had dark hair and was much loved by his uncle Renly and everyone in the palace. The kingdom once again reeled from the change. But this time, the truth had been told, and honor had prevailed. The North retained its strength. The wars left deep scars, but also lessons. Bran had become a symbol of rebirth, while the shadow of the Lannisters receded into the cold stones of their castle. Ned, though aged, held the weight of peace firmly, and the Seven Kingdoms once again awaited their next destiny, not knowing if the calm was the end, or just the eve of a new storm.